Hi folks, Big Ugly Jim here. Just wanted to say if you enjoy the video, make sure you like and subscribe. Those are the things that tells YouTube to like me, and I really want YouTube to like me. Why doesn't YouTube like me? Just kidding. YouTube likes me just fine, but would like me more if you did all the things. Also, if you want to, you can always head over to my Patreon. The link is in the description below, and consider showing me some support, which would be awesome. Ultimately, what I want to do today is I want to talk about Defund the Police. I wanted to make this video for two reasons. The first of which is I think it's a really important conversation that we need to have, and it's also extremely timely. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say I think that this conversation is one that ultimately we need to have in order to make sure that our society aligns with who we want to be as a society. I think that's a really important thing, and I don't think we're there right now. The second reason I wanted to talk about this is there has been a spate of cops killing kids or people in general. The most recent one that I was made aware of was a 13-year-old, according to Sean Hannity, a 13-year-old man. But a 13-year-old boy was killed by police in the course of their duties. Just for the record, when you tell someone to drop the gun and put their hands up, and then they drop the gun and put their hands up, and you shoot them, you're in the wrong. And all that talk about, oh, danger, danger, it's a dangerous situation, that's misdirection. At the end of the day, that cop was wrong, and that kid is dead. I think we need to seriously be scrutinizing why this happens so often and what we can do to change things. Not scrutinizing it and not fixing it means accepting it and allowing it to continue to happen. And I think one of the great things about us as a species, as a culture, as a everything, is our ability to hold ourselves up to a higher standard and find ways to make that happen. I think that's a good thing. So to explain Defund the Police, I'm going to use an allegory, thus the title of the video today. It's definitely not real, but I think it helps to put into context when people talk about it without having all of the mental baggage that we might associate with when someone says defund the police. So instead of talking about police and crime, I'm going to paint a picture about the education system and testing. We're going to pretend that we live in a world where there are teachers that are responsible for educating children, and then there are testmasters, who are a separate group whose job is to perform the testing and evaluate the results. So this isn't how the world works. It's not real. Please don't point out that it's not real. It's not real. I know that. It's an allegory. In the beginning, there were educators. Looks pretty official, right? It's a Calvin and Hobbes book. Totally. But it looks official. We're going to keep it up. In the beginning, there were educators. They were in charge with assisting children with learning to read, write, reduce fractions, and understand the physical and social aspects of the world around them. The people looked upon their creation and saw that it was good. And then the people began to question whether or not the children were really learning, and so the test was created. Educators could test children and use that as a means to validate that the educator had been doing a good job. And the people looked upon this creation and saw that it was good. And then the people began to question whether or not the educators were being entirely honest. If they put their finger on the scale, they could make the test look like they were doing a good job teaching children when perhaps that wasn't the case. And the people created the Testmasters, who could be responsible for creating and administering and validating the tests. And the people looked upon their creation and saw that it was good. Added effect. And then the conservative people began to wonder why it cost so much money to teach the children. And they began to suspect that there was waste. The Testmasters were learning to focus their tests on specific concepts and were showing that educators were not teaching the children properly and that there must be waste. And this began a long string of conservatives removing waste for the good of the children, with Testmasters refining tests to show the waste still existed. And the people looked upon their creation, and they didn't really understand it. But they were nervous, and they didn't want to risk their children's futures. The Testmasters needed more and more resources to fine-tune the testing, and received that with the blessings of the people. And the educators grew weaker and less in number. Their responsibilities greater and greater. Their class sizes larger. Is this still an allegory? Because this feels pretty god larger. They're teaching more and more focused directly on the tests and less on assisting children with learning to read, write, reduce fractions, and understand the physical and social world around them. A small contingent of the people began to see the problem in a different light. They realized that this was the cart being put before the horse. By focusing on the test results, even though they were the real data that we were used to looking at, they claimed that we were missing the point. We were putting all our money into the Testmasters to keep generating better and clearer data, which more and more showed that the education system was failing the students. But that was because of an incorrect assumption. Cutting the resources to the educators meant that they were less effective at teaching the children. The children, as a result, did poorer on the tests, which we thought justified better testing to show all the ways that we were failing the children. But what we were really doing was putting our resources in the wrong place. And the children were suffering as a result. This small group of people started to promote the notion that we needed to defund the Testmasters. When most of the people heard that, they were angry. The Testmasters were the only ones trying to keep the waste at bay, and they were trying to help the children. If we just pull all the money away from the Testmasters, then that would mean the children never even learn to read or write or reduce fractions or understand the physical and social world around them. And that was important. Again, that was an allegory. It actually feels eerily real because it's fairly close to what's actually been happening in the public education sphere. In policing, though, we've spent decades, increasing funding to police and decreasing funding to social services, to mental health services, to public education, and on and on and on and on. And then we feel helpless when we look at the world around us and realize that we're seeing more and more criminals and our prisons are becoming more and more full of people. My argument, and the Defund the Police argument, is that those cuts are creating real-world problems. And those problems are primarily being burdened by poor people and people of color, people struggling with addictions, people struggling with mental illness, et cetera, et cetera. And also, police. Police have to shoulder that burden. We've steadily scaled back on spending on all of these areas. And those are the things that are supposed to benefit us socially and societally. They are the teachers or the educators in my analogy. They're trying to do more with less, and they are always failing. The areas that we keep cutting have something in common, and that is that those are the areas that are intended to help people. It's the social safety net. A lot of people hear that and they think we're talking about the welfare program where you go and get free money for doing nothing like a bunch of bums. But that's not, the social safety net is so much more than that. And in this case, we're talking about things like access to mental health beds in hospitals, the ability to get a reasonably priced counselor or therapist or psychologist even. These services are there to help people who are having problems and to resolve or help resolve those problems before they become a serious issue. We're not nailing it. And as a result, people are essentially left to their own devices when they're faced with real, actual problems. And that means that they're not getting the help they need, and those problems will grow exponentially until they hit a breaking point. In my allegory, the police are the Testmasters. They aren't selfishly motivated in my story. They're focusing on data, and they're trying to find solutions to a very real problem. That's very much like how we have police focused so deeply on crime statistics and trying to deploy officers to communities based on crime statistics. This is a process that's inherently flawed and fraught with problems. It ends up with the results focusing police attention on neighborhoods that have larger share of criminality and nuisance crimes, which are, generally speaking, neighborhoods with poor people and people of color. The more police direct their focus at those neighborhoods, the more they see criminality and nuisance crimes. And that feeds the loop and says, see, we were right. We need to deploy more officers to this neighborhood because this neighborhood obviously has a problem. When we continue to throw money at the police and use that as a way to try and tackle criminality and nuisance crimes, we're putting them unnecessarily at risk, right? Because there's less and less social safety net to intervene before events that can be very traumatic for all parties involved. The police wind up having to deal with every single problem when it's at the breaking point. That's when you call the police, unless your name is Karen. And those scenarios are risky. They're extraordinarily risky. That's not doing a service to the police when we place them in that situation. Every day they are dealing with people who are at the lowest point. So defunding the police isn't about getting rid of the police, right? Defunding the Testmasters wasn't about stopping having Testmasters or tests. It's still an important role that needs to be played, but that role requires proper context. That's the thing that I think is missing here. What matters isn't the test, it's that we're not doing a good job of teaching because we're stretched too thin. And nobody can pass a test if they haven't learned the material. Focusing on crime statistics makes us want to expand the police every time because what we see is more and more incidences occurring. We don't want to get rid of the police. We want to stop spending outrageous quantities of money to fund them in what is the wrong direction. We still need police, but we also need a social safety net to intervene long before the police would have to. What we don't need is a heavily armed civic military who are focused intently on poor people and people of color in their communities. The answer to the question of funding should be guided by what we want to accomplish. I think that what we want is a peaceful, stable society where people are able to excel and succeed. When people have problems, I think we should be there for them. When they reach out to our society to help, we should hear them, not turn a cold shoulder because we don't have the money. When people don't have support, that's when their problems fester and grow and become massive. And the only solution we have at that point is the police. And that's why we keep pitting the police against people who, for whatever reason, are dealing with a lack of strong socioeconomic support. And that pits the police against the people, and particularly the poor and people of color. That puts everyone in greater danger. You know, that cop said something about feeling like he was terrified and being in danger. And yeah, he is. Because our system doesn't expect to develop programming that will help people before the situation where this kid's got a gun. And I don't know this whole story. My understanding is he's with another guy. That guy may or may not have, but probably did take a few shots, I think, at a car. Inexcusable. That kid ran from the cops. Probably not all right either in a perfect world. And he wound up ditching the gun, putting his hands up and stopping and getting killed. How does that make sense? Why is that okay? Let's try spending our money smarter than that. Let's be there to support people when they're going through the hard times and engage people who know how to help them through those hard times, how to heal instead of punish. Well, I hope the allegory helped frame this conversation maybe a bit more clearly. Again, please like and subscribe. And if you're so inclined, head over to the Patreon and patronize me. The Patreon is quite new. I only have one patron. So thanks are much quicker. A massive, huge thank you to my good friend Dave Anderson, my one patron, my one and only. You are a goddamn gem, sir, and I'm deeply grateful for your support. No matter what, I'm really enjoying just making these videos, and I sincerely appreciate everyone just taking the time to watch. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.